Alrighty, welcome listeners to a new edition of Spec the Truth, brought to you by Earlymark, where innovation meets precise specification. Today we're speaking with Seamus Farrell from SOPREMA to discuss the realities of rooftop waterproofing, including the pros and cons of liquid applied versus sheet membrane systems, and why membrane systems play such a crucial role in long-term building performance. We'll also explore the differences between PVC and modified bitumen systems, why these solutions are commonly used on critical infrastructure projects, and the importance of maintenance planning to maximise the lifespan of a roof system. How's that sound, Seamus?
Yeah, look, thanks, Michael, for having me. I'm really excited to delve into the different membrane solutions that are available on the market and the pros and cons of each. And yeah, really excited to get going.
Thanks, mate. No, and I reckon let's get right into the pros and cons of liquid versus sheet systems. So I've got a couple of questions. I'm just going to hit you with them and love to get your feedback on what you've experienced out in the market and what you see moving forward. So, Seamus, first one, why do so many roof remediation projects involve failed liquid applied membrane systems?
Yeah, so I think the first reason is in the Australian market, liquid membranes have been so prevalent within the market over the last 20 years. So evidently, most of the roofs that were installed 20 years ago are liquid roofs. So yeah, about 90% of the remediation projects that we're involved in are, liquid systems that were installed, let's say 10 to 15 years ago. And look, liquid membranes can be, a quick, cheap and effective way to waterproof a roof deck. However, they simply just don't last as long as other membrane systems and can be susceptible to a greater number of risks during the installation, such as weather, the curing times and workmanship error. And this can actually mean that the total cost over the building life cycle can begin to, rise due to that remediation cost.
Wow. And do you see now in current construction, is liquid applied still more popular, or do you notice that sheet membranes are starting to take over?
Yeah, so look, we are starting to see a shift, and I think that's due to this whole remedial sector has kind of, let's say, boomed over the past 10 years in Australia, because of the amount of these failing roof systems. So I think, end users, architects, builders are starting to think to themselves like, look, if we had specified a more durable membrane at the start, we wouldn't actually be coming back to repair the roof as often as we can. So we are starting to see a shift, towards using more durable systems at the get-go. So the repair cost and time wasted, over the lifespan of the building, is reduced.
And are you seeing that drive come from the contractor or the designer or the asset owner? Who sort of or is there a clear-cut answer there, or do you see who might be pushing that change more so?
Yeah, so and again, it depends on the state. Australia is a big country made up of different states and territories. So, for example, in Sydney, that is our biggest market for sheet membranes, and it's mainly been driven by the design, the DBP Act, that was introduced into New South Wales, and this gives more, let's say, puts more liability onto the design practitioner or, the designers of that project. So they are starting to think, what is the risk of specifying a certain system that will work for maybe 10, 15 years, but over, 30, 40 years, and what is the cost of using that system and the risk of water ingress over the lifespan of the building, and also the risk during construction, what can go wrong during construction when specifying a certain material. So it is driven by various points of the market, but it really just depends on the state, depends on the type of project as well.
And I suppose it's also, the lifespan of it depends on the installation of it. And that sort of takes me to my next question, how much does the installation conditions such as weather, curing times and workmanship impact the long-term performance of a liquid waterproofing system?
Yeah, so look, liquid membranes are the most weather affected membranes on the market, and that's due to the curing time. So essentially, these membranes are fabricated on site by way of spraying, rolling, or brushing the membrane onto the substrate. And of course, these membranes cannot be installed in any form of rain. So any form of rain during construction essentially stops works. However, also when sections of the roof are waiting to cure, so liquid membranes are applied and there's a time that it takes for that membrane to cure, and that can vary depending on the product. In
Mm,
Melbourne, for example, when we have 4 seasons in a day, sometimes and we can get really
yeah.
unexpected bouts of rain, and this can actually affect the installation of an area because during that curing period, it's not fully dry. If we have a bout of rain, that area needs to be reapplied, unfortunately, and that can, extend that installation time over the construction phase.
And I suppose that goes back to the point you made previously, where a lot of the remedial work you're doing now is from construction 10, 15 years ago, where, as I said, you get a little bit of adverse weather, it can really throw things off. Or if you've got an applicator who might be working through that weather, all of a sudden you might have a compromised waterproofing system. 10, 15 years later, here you are out there sort of fixing these potential issues.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, a lot of the kind of failed liquid systems that we do inspect, there's blistering in the membrane, and that happens during the installation, and it just wasn't
Yeah.
picked up during the inspection or testing and verification of that system. So now we are starting to see it, and it really is 90% is a harrowing stat for liquid for remedial projects that we work on. So
Wow.
yeah, installer error and all these different variables that can happen
Mm.
during the installation phase can present these risks over the lifespan of the building.
And Seamus, in what ways can the as specified waterproofing design differ from the as built condition on site?
Yeah, so look for liquid membranes specifically, basically what we're trying to achieve is a desired dry film thickness, which is
Mm.
essentially the thickness of the product once it's fully cured, so once it's fully dry. And this must be achieved for that product to meet the specification and the warranty. However, when we're actually testing, when there's an inspector testing the dry film thickness of a cured membrane, it
Yep.
may achieve the desired thickness in one area of the roof, but not all the areas of the roofs, of the roof. So this can again lead to room for error and for larger
Yep.
roof areas. And it's very difficult to test every square millimeter of that liquid membrane to prove that it meets that desired specified film thickness.
And advantages, like what advantages do pre-manufactured sheet membranes offer in terms of consistency, quality control, and lifespan?
Yeah, so look, unlike liquid membranes, sheet membranes are pre-manufactured in a factory, meaning that they have a guaranteed thickness. So these rolls of membranes or rolls of pre-manufactured membranes, they just simply need to be either torch welded or hot air welded on site to create a
Yep.
fully tanked system with a constant membrane thickness. And this application procedure will actually depend on the system that we use, and whether that's a modified bitumen or a PVC system, we'll get into the differences between the two. But when we look at the lifespan of these membranes, when they're installed correctly, so the lifespan of sheet membranes, when installed correctly, they can actually
Yep.
achieve a lifespan of over 35 years. Meaning that the client doesn't need to keep paying for a full replacement system throughout the building life cycle. And they're also much easier and cheaper to repair than a liquid system, meaning that if the
Wow.
roof did ever get damaged, we can simply patch repair and keep the warranty intact.
Interesting. And you touched on in that answer PVCM bitumen systems. Can you give us a comparison between the two?
Yeah, so I'll just explain briefly the
Yeah.
differences between the two systems. So yeah, modified bitumen systems are typically installed in two layers. So two
Yep.
layers of membrane, a base and a cap sheet, and with an overall thickness between 7 and 8 millimeters, and that depends on the product that we use. And look, they're incredibly robust membranes. They have incredibly high lifespans, and when installed correctly. And typically, they're fully bonded to the substrate, meaning by means of torch bonding or contact adhesion. So that's modified bitumen. And then we look at single ply or synthetic single ply membranes. And these are installed in a single layer of pre-manufactured PVC or polyvinyl chloride, which is either mechanically fastened or glued to the substrate. And it's a couple of the factors that we kind of take into account when we're consulting with an architect on what membrane we want to specify or
Yeah.
include into design. So it's the overall design of the building is the first thing. So we look at the overall concept or design of the building. And we also look at the buildability or the practicalities of installing a certain membrane for a specific project. And we also look at commercial viability. So what is the client's budget? And we always want to weigh up the cost versus the value over time. And lastly is the building life cycle. So what is the roof actually being used for during the life cycle of the building? And that will determine what type of membrane we use, either bitumen or PVC.
That's great. And sticking with the PVC or modified bitumen, I want to discuss what project factors determine whether PVC or modified bitumen is more suited within that waterproofing solution.
Yeah, so I suppose the first one is always, what is the roof being used for? So what is that roof space actually being used for, over the lifespan of the building? You're going to design a roof very differently if it's just used for planned maintenance. So if it's only going to be used, as a protection of the building, or are people walking out onto the roof? Are they smoking cigarettes on the roof? Is there foot traffic on the roof? Are we adding planting to the roof system? So these are very different factors that we always want to take into account when we're specifying a bitumen or a PVC system. And I suppose when we look at the durability, so bituminous membrane systems, as I said, between 7 and 8 millimeter thick in 2 layers, incredibly durable, and can take a high amount of foot traffic. And they can also have a varying different types of finishes on that roof, whether that be pods and pavers, tiles on the roof, or a green roof system. So they're typically, when we look at the durability of membranes, bitumen membranes are incredibly robust and durable. And PVC membranes, depending on the thickness of membrane that we use, will be determined by the expected footfall of that roof system. And I suppose for the builder and the people building that roof or installing that roof, we look at PVC systems. They're much quicker to install than a bitumen system. So if there is time constraints in the installation of a roof, we typically go with a PVC solution. And also aesthetics as well is another topic I'll touch on as well. So for a PVC membrane with a PVC membrane, for example, we can actually mimic, for example, a standing seam zinc roof by specifying a copper membrane. Whereas bitumen membranes, typically they have black or grey or white granules on the roof. Whereas with PVC roof systems, we can create some nice aesthetics for the user and the surrounding area of the building. So they're kind of just touching on why we would use one over the other. And as always, it depends on the project. And we always want to discuss this as early as we can with the architect.
Excellent. And I feel like you sort of touched on this in that answer you just gave, but I'd love to focus a little bit on the on infrastructure projects, hospitals, data centers. We spec a lot of that through Earlymark and through our software spec suite. And curious to why are sheet membrane systems commonly preferred for critical infrastructure projects like those of hospitals or data centers?
Yeah, so look, for this topic, I'd like to mention, and it's quite a harrowing stat, which was referenced in the Architects magazine. And the stat is roofs only make up about 2% of construction costs. However, water intrusion accounts for more than 70% of construction litigation, which is quite a damning stat. And it can definitely scare a lot of people. But it is a fact. The cost of the roof itself is so small when we actually compare it to the cost of damage that can happen. And this always comes back to the question, what is the hidden cost of specifying a certain type of waterproofing over another? And when we look at projects like hospitals, data centers, pharmaceutical facilities, as you mentioned, these fall under the bracket of critical infrastructure. And when I get asked, okay, what's the definition of critical infrastructure? And that's when the value of the assets within the building far outweigh the value of the building itself. And it's really in these projects where choosing a sheet membrane is more durable because it has a longer lifespan. And it's a key decision, a vital decision early on, due to the cost of a leak in one of these facilities. Like imagine the cost of a leak in a data center, for example.
Seamus, how do PVC and modified bitumen systems compare in terms of durability, installation speed, maintenance, and aesthetics?
Yeah, so firstly looking at durability, so both are quite comparable with regards to
Yep.
durability, whereas comparing sheet membranes to liquid is kind of a different topic as we
Yep.
went through already. And that's because both systems have really high puncture resistance and they can kind of withstand normal foot traffic on a roof. But for example, where we have roofs with a lot of plant, think of a data center, a hospital, pharmaceutical facility, typically modified bitumen systems are preferred due to the durability, as I mentioned earlier. Whereas if we have a large open space, so a really nice, clean, open roof, and with no plant on the roof, PVC membranes are a great option due to the speed of installation and how
Yep.
quick we can get that membrane down. And that goes on to the next topic, which is installation speed. So as I mentioned, PVC membranes are preferred when speed is important to the client, as the applicator can quickly roll out the membrane and
Yep.
mechanically fasten it to the substrate. Whereas bitumen membranes, they have to be torch welded or adhered, which can take longer. However, this will also depend on the complexity of the roof, the geometry,
Yeah.
the plant that's on the roof, all them. They're all different topics that we always take into consideration when we're looking at the speed of installation of a system. Now, touching on
Mm.
maintenance, so both maintenance have standard maintenance procedures for kind of any roof system, but this will actually depend on more on what the roof is being used for, than the membrane itself. And we will touch on maintenance later in the
Yeah.
podcast, but just to touch on aesthetics as well. So, as I mentioned, we can actually we can get some really aesthetically pleasing roofs with a PVC system, because we can
Yep.
mimic, standing seam roofs by specifying a copper colored membrane. And whereas, as I mentioned, bitumen membranes have typically a black, gray, or white granules. But we can really install kind of a range of finishes on these membranes, such as pavers, green roofs, or tiles on the roof as well.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of this conversation so far has focused around sort of remedial and repairing, and the next question I have is, why is repairability and life cycle performance becoming increasingly important when selecting roof waterproofing systems?
Yeah, look, repairability is a massive topic, because
Yeah.
we've seen the whole
Yep.
remedial sector. There's a whole sector in building. There's remedial builders, there's remedial consultants. We've seen the sector boom in the past number of years, in Australia. And I think architects and end users are becoming more conscious of the materials that they're using and how easy they are to repair if any damages were to occur. And this why, for example, modified bitumen systems are becoming specified more and more. So looking at bitumen systems, example, if damage was to occur on a
Mm.
roof with a modified bitumen membrane, all we need to do is simply just reheat an area of the existing
Okay.
membrane, so the area of concern, and we install a patch of new membrane on top, and this will keep the warranty intact for the end user. And look, if the client does want to re-waterproof the entire roof area, so if there's a lot of damage on the roof, things have happened, over the past few years, and the client is like, right, we just want to have a new waterproof membrane on the roof. And with modified bitumen, we can actually just retorch a brand new bitumen cap sheet onto the existing membrane without removing what's there already. And this is really
Wow.
important because it ties into sustainability and, reducing the amount of wastage over the
Cost.
lifespan of the building. And really, look, by choosing the right products and with the right maintenance procedure, we can have a solution that can actually last many cycles or lifespans, up to 100 years, and with very little waste and cost to the client.
Yeah, it's interesting, and with that, and we've touched on maintenance, and we get asked, a lot of the consultants vertical of our business do get asked for maintenance schedules for infrastructure in particular. I'd love to touch on the development of a maintenance schedule specific to bitumen. Why is a plant maintenance why is a planned maintenance schedule critical to maximizing the lifespan of a modified bitumen roofing system?
Yeah, look, really important topic. And I think
Mm.
when people hear the word maintenance, they always think, oh, the time, the money. But really, look, when
Yeah.
using sheet membranes and bitumen membranes, as an example, as your waterproofing option, the maintenance procedures, they're actually not time consuming whatsoever. Now, of course, this will depend on the building itself. When we look at maintenance of a roof area, if there's plant on the roof, there's equipment on the roof, that the maintenance of that equipment is separate. But when we're looking
Yep.
at the actual maintenance of the waterproofing membrane, it's really important that there is a maintenance schedule, because when we have a maintenance schedule and when it's adhered to, the importance of it is that we can spot a problem before there is actual costly damage to the asset.
Yep.
And for each waterproofing system, each package we hand over to the client, and we always include a specific maintenance plan in the operation and maintenance manual. So this is a pack of information that we hand over to the client, and this will be dependent on, number one, the product that we use, and also the intended use of that roof.
Yeah, it's leading right into my next question. It was, how does the intended use of a rooftop influence the type and frequency of a maintenance required?
Yeah, good. Again, great question. So if you look at it, just a standard exposed sheet membrane system, where the roof doesn't have public access, it's only going to be used for maintenance. The purpose of that roof is simply just to protect the structure. The maintenance is very simple. It's just twice a year. Check all the outlets. Okay. Check if there's any damage. In certain areas of Australia, as I should say, there could be storms. The risk of a storm. If there is a storm, if there's high winds, falling trees, just check the roof after a storm if there is any damage, and make a note of that damage in a maintenance log, and call the applicator. I think that's a key point here. So that's just your standard exposed roof system. But when we look at roofs like green roofs, for example, so if we have planting on that roof system, that will have its own maintenance schedule, because we're not only maintaining the waterproofing, we're also maintaining the planting that's on that roof. So that will have its own specific maintenance schedule. And look, there is for green roof systems, there is low maintenance options. When I say low maintenance, I mean the lowest maintenance options, because every roof does have to be maintained, and there will be specific procedures that need to happen for that as well, in relation to the planting. And then, as I mentioned, if there's plant on the roof, if there's tricky junctions and details, just a walk over of the roof to spot any damage. And look, if any asset owner or facilities managers has concerns of an existing asset, an existing roof system, they believe that there's damage, or if there actually is water ingress, just give SOPREMA a call, give a local applicator a call. There is specialists out there that can take a look at your roof and determine the problems.
Excellent. And I feel like throughout your last couple of answers, you've touched on the environment and different weather conditions and how that might play a factor. With that, what environmental and drainage considerations should be assessed when developing a roof maintenance schedule?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think a good topic to touch on with regards to climate and different conditions for different locations, coastal locations, inland locations, is again comes back to the point I mentioned earlier, is specifying the correct system from the get-go. So number one, has the specified system been designed to withstand this climate region? For example, up in Queensland or northern Australia, there could be storms, high rainfall. So it might not rain for 6 months, but then in a day we might get 6 months of rain. So these are all things that need to be studied and need to be discussed early on. Falls within the roof as well. So when we're looking at drainage, has the deck actually been designed correctly to meet Australian standards? And these are all things that need to happen from the get-go for that roof to have its best chance over the period, over the lifespan of the building. And look, other things we take into account. So for example, in Sydney, there's certain areas within Sydney where we have cockatoos, animals encroaching on the roof space. And has the client taken that into consideration? What is what damage can these animals cause to the membranes? And these are all things that, if we don't know about them, we can't recommend the correct system from the get-go or the right maintenance schedule. So it's really important that all this information, this kind of investigation of a specific area or location where we're installing a roof system, and these are all things that we need to take into account when we're developing a maintenance schedule, but more importantly, designing the correct system from the get-go.
And I think that's interesting because you have mentioned yourselves for the maintenance schedule, and I think it's really important that anyone out there watching and listening to this is that it does sound like there's a bit to consider here, but that's why Seamus and the team there at SOPREMA are an asset. Reach out, have a chat with Seamus, discuss your project, and Seamus, I'm sure you wouldn't mind if they if they were to engage you, so you can put this together and take this weight off their shoulders.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think I always like to use the phrase with architects is that architects are like the GP or the general practitioner. Very difficult job, have to design, full building and its environment around it. Whereas we come in as, I suppose, the neurosurgeon. We know a lot about the roof area. We're experts in waterproof. And so, no, absolutely, more than happy to support any architecture and the design phase of projects. It's what I do on a daily basis. So, no, absolutely, no problem with anyone reaching out for advice.
Excellent. Yeah, James, you take the risk from the designer. I'm sure that'd be well and truly welcomed. What simple maintenance checks can significantly reduce the likelihood of waterproofing failure over the life of a building?
Yeah, so the big one is blocked drainage outlets. So this is a big one, especially, for example, with schools. So kids kicking football in the yard, football goes onto the roof. Obviously there's going to be falls within that deck, and that if that outlet doesn't have a leaf guard, or if it doesn't have protection on it, that could actually block that outlet. And what will happen, even if all the outlets aren't blocked on the roof, water will pond in that area and cause stress to the membrane. So there are things that, asset owners need to check, is their outlets blocked? Has there been fallen trees? So I always say after a storm, if there's any extreme weather event, and this, storms, when I say extreme weather event, is it on the news? Has this storm been on the news? Always check your roof after a storm. But look, in a normal environment, sheet membrane systems that are exposed biannual, so twice a year, walk up on the roof, check if the outlets are damaged, check if there's any visible damage on the roof, and if any asset owner who has any questions or any concerns, if they're not sure about what they're looking at, our contact details will be in the operation and maintenance manual, and that should be read, and reach out to us if you need us to have a look at the roof.
Excellent. And when it does come, for those designers out there watching this, listening to this, when it comes to considering your waterproof products, we have Seamus and the team's details within Earlymark Spec Suite, so you can reach out, have these conversations directly with the team. They'll answer any questions, and you put your mind at ease that the SOPREMA waterproofing solution's the way to go. Yeah, thank you, Seamus, mate. This has been super informative. We've covered off on many a topic. The pros and cons of liquid versus sheet membrane. We've discussed the project factors, where the PVC or modified bitumen is the more suited waterproofing solution. And we've also gone through the maintenance schedule specific to bitumen. It's been super informative. If any of the team need to reach out to you, any of our designers that are watching this need to reach out to you, we have information under this post, as well as Seamus and the team's information within Spec Suite. Seamus, thank you so much for spending some time with Earlymark.
Cheers, Michael. Really appreciate it. Really enjoyed discussing this topic. And thanks very much.
My pleasure, mate. Thank you again.
Cheers.